In tonight's news edition, His Majesty the King and the New Zealand Governor-General hold talks in Amman on bolstering bilateral cooperation and discuss developments in the region, namely Mideast peace efforts and the Syrian crisis. The U.S. Secretary of State, on a fresh round of diplomacy in the region, says world powers would pursue talks with Iran to resolve the nuclear dispute, but stressed the process could not go on forever. And China warns of trouble on its doorstep, and a U.S. official criticizes Beijing for failing to use its influence to stop North Korea's warlike rhetoric against the United States and South Korea. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. His Majesty King Abdullah and Her Majesty Queen Rania received the visiting New Zealand Governor-General Jerry Mateparae and his spouse, who arrived in Jordan yesterday for a 3-day official visit as part of a tour of the region. His Majesty and Mateparae held a round of talks attended by officials from both sides, during which they discussed ways to bolster bilateral ties in various fields. His Majesty outlined areas of cooperation the two countries can build on, especially in the renewable energy, education, and tourism sectors. Regional developments, including Mideast peace efforts and the crisis in Syria, were also discussed. While warning of the repercussions of the Syria war on the entire region and highlighting the economic burdens of hosting an ever-growing influx of refugees, His Majesty voiced appreciation of international assistance to Syrians in the kingdom. On the Palestinian issue, His Majesty said Mideast peace remains the central regional problem and said the international community must step up efforts to bring the Palestinians and Israelis back to negotiations. The New Zealand Governor-General hailed the King's reform drive and commended his continued quest for lasting peace in the region. New Zealand's non-resident ambassador to Jordan, Taha McPherson, spoke to JTV's Iman Lehkour on major areas of bilateral cooperation.
That our two countries have a very positive and friendly political relationship, but I think our two governments are very keen also to look at ways we can deepen our cooperation in a range of areas. For example, our trade and economic linkages are good, but we believe that there are areas where our trade and economic relationship can be strengthened. And certainly my foreign minister, who visited Jordan about 3 weeks ago, discussed some of these areas, and we're hoping that their excellencies will take those discussions forward. We believe in areas like renewable energy, agricultural technology, specialised engineering, perhaps defence and education. We believe there's great scope and great opportunity to deepen our relationship. And some of those areas will be ones that we are discussing during the course of Their Excellency's visit. And of course we'll be taking those forward later this year when we begin our Foreign Ministry consultations and bring also a multi-agency delegation back with various different agencies from New Zealand to really look at ways we can actually progress these very constructive discussions.
Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour also met with the visiting New Zealand leader and his accompanying delegation. The meeting and discussions over a luncheon hosted by Mansour dealt with ways to further bilateral cooperation as well as developments in the region. Mansour also briefed the guests on the challenges of meeting the needs of thousands of Syrian refugees who arrive in Jordan on a daily basis. Separately, Mateparae called on the parliament, where he met with Senate President Tahir Masri. The meeting tackled areas of cooperation between the two countries, namely in areas of parliamentary work. Mateparae voiced interest in boosting cooperation with Jordan and hailed the kingdom's role in Mideast issues. Parai also met with House Speaker Saad Hail Srour. Srour stressed the importance of parliamentary diplomacy in bolstering bilateral ties between the two countries in the interest and service of both peoples. Jordanian-European ties and Mideast developments also topped a meeting His Majesty held with a visiting European parliamentary delegation. King Abdullah briefed members of the Committee on the Middle East of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe on Jordan's reform process and the landmark January parliamentary elections, as well as steps leading to parliamentary governments. The king also briefed them on the pressure of hosting hundreds of thousands of Syrians on Jordan's national resources. His Majesty also spoke about Mideast peace and the outcome of U.S. President Barack Obama's visit to Jordan vis-à-vis efforts to revive Palestinian-Israeli negotiations to arrive at a two-state solution. Head of the delegation, Josette Durier, said the visit, while aimed at showing support to Jordan's reform process, comes to express Europe's keenness to assist the kingdom in serving the needs of Syrians fleeing their country. During a meeting with the Prime Minister, the European delegation was briefed on Jordan's democratic march and legislative reforms. Nsour said His Majesty inspires and led the reform process long before the so-called Arab Spring. Nsour also discussed with the delegation ways to enhance ties between Jordan and the European Union, saying stronger bilateral cooperation is in best interest of all sides. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas met in Ramallah with U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, who is on a fresh round of diplomacy in the region. On his arrival at the Palestinian presidential compound, Kerry was welcomed by senior Palestinian official Saeb Ariqat before entering into talks with Abbas. Kerry's meeting with Abbas, as well as other Palestinian officials, aims to follow up on last month's discussions during the U.S. president's trip to the region and to support Palestinians and Israelis in resuming dialogue leading to peace. Earlier and before arriving in the West Bank, John Kerry said world powers would pursue further talks with Iran to resolve the dispute over its nuclear program, but stressed the process could not go on forever. While on a visit to Turkey, Kerry added that diplomacy would continue despite what he called the complicating factor of an Iranian presidential election in June. His comments came after a second round of talks between Iran and 6 world powers ended in Kazakhstan yesterday without a breakthrough. United States, Russia, China, France, Britain, and Germany offered Iran modest relief from international sanctions in return of suspending its high-grade uranium enrichment work, but Iran instead presented its own proposal to the meeting. Kerry stressed the U.S. President Barack Obama is committed to continuing the diplomatic process regarding Iran.
This is not something where you can play to the clock. You can't just delay and talk for the sake of talking. So we would repeat to Iran, it is our desire to have a diplomatic solution, but this choice really lies in the hands of Iranians. If you have a peaceful program for nuclear power, as a number of nations do, it is not hard to prove to the world that it is peaceful.
Turkish and Israeli relations were also on the U.S. Secretary of State's agenda during his visit to Istanbul. Kerry urged Turkey and Israel to restore full relations. His message comes 2 weeks after the U.S. president pulled off a diplomatic coup by holding a 3-way telephone call with the Israeli and Turkish prime ministers who had not spoken since 2011. Relations between the two countries were shattered by the killing of 9 Turkish citizens in an Israeli naval raid on a Gaza-bound flotilla in 2010. Turkish Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoglu stressed on the 3 demands his country made in order to normalize relations with Israel, including easing the blockade on Gaza, which Israel insists is for security concerns.
Everybody should be aware that Mavi Marmara was a painful experience. This pain can be healed psychologically only if all parties become sensitive. I have spoken to families and seen that their pain has not healed yet. The most important thing is to take determined steps to make progress and to fulfill our 3 demands.
In Syria, representatives of the World Health Organization said in Damascus that as most UN workers have left the country because of intensified mortar shelling, their team in Syria now consists mainly of Syrians. Elizabeth Hoff, on a visit to health facilities in Syria, said the country has highly qualified medical professionals and the agency is helping with medicines and vaccinations. Hoff added that the agency has received money from traditional Western donors, but that Gulf countries still had to fulfill the pledges they had made during last January's conference in Kuwait.
Well, WHO has received money now in 2013 from the traditional donor, from the Western countries. What we have not received is any follow-up from the Kuwaiti conference, from the non-traditional governments, from the Gulf countries. But we are continuing to support the Syrian people throughout the country.
On the ground, meanwhile, in Syria, amateur video uploaded to the internet showed widespread destruction to apartment blocks in Aleppo and a large crowd attempting to rescue survivors after an airstrike by a Syrian Air Force jet on the district of Al-Ansari. The victims of the attack are said to have been civilians. Fighting is also reported in Jobar, a rebel-controlled suburb southeast of Damascus, as well as the Sukaina Shrine in Daraya district.
Allahu Akbar.
And over to the crisis in Asia. U.S. Republican Senator John McCain has criticized China for failing to use its influence to stop North Korea's warlike rhetoric against the United States and South Korea despite the escalating crisis. McCain, a member of the Armed Services Committee, said China has failed to rein in what could be a catastrophic situation and urged Beijing to put pressure on Pyongyang by influencing its economy. McCain's remarks came amid growing concern over the stability of Eastern Asia and warnings by China of trouble on its doorsteps. Farah Ajlouni has more.
As China deplored the tensions on Korean Peninsula and in an apparent reference to North Korea, said no country should be allowed to plunge the region into chaos. U.S. officials are counting on Beijing to do more to dissolve the crisis. The U.S. believes that China holds the key to the Korean Peninsula problem, as Beijing could cut off their economy if they want to. The United States, keen to avoid action that could provoke the North, postponed a long-scheduled missile test in California. Former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Bill Richardson, is calling for a new diplomatic approach to North Korea, involving China as a key negotiator in talks to help calm high tensions in the divided Korean Peninsula. Richardson has made numerous trips to North Korea that have included effort to free detained Americans.
I think China has to be the key. We have to really get them to lean on North Korea. But I think a new diplomatic track is needed, some out-of-the-box diplomacy involving the UN, the World Bank, some special envoys outside of government, because I think we need to get to this new young leader who I don't think is calling the show, but nonetheless, because it's a deity, because he is nominally in charge, is probably the key player there.
Meanwhile, the leaders of Australia, Finland, Myanmar and Japan, meeting in China for the Boao Forum to promote Asian development, have expressed concern over the stability of their region. Chinese President Xi Jinping, who opened the meeting, has promised a peaceful, prosperous China would help its neighbors. Australian Prime Minister Julia Gillard warned that North Korean aggression threatened the security of the entire region.
All countries in the region share a deep interest in strategic stability, but the consequences of conflict are ever more severe for us all. This is now here more clear than on the Korean Peninsula. There, any aggression is a threat to the interests of every country in the region.
In Pyongyang, North Korean state-run television aired a video of soldiers training military dogs and conducting a firing drill amid heightening tensions. The North, led by 30-year-old Kim Jong-un, has been issuing threats of war against the United States and South Korea since the United Nations imposed sanctions after its third nuclear weapon test in February. Farah Ajlouni for the News at 10.
2 years after the devastating tsunami struck the Japanese islands, traces of radiations are still present. Radioactive water has apparently leaked from another underground storage tank at the crippled Fukushima power plant. According to the utility company TEPCO, 120 tons of radioactive water may have leaked from another nearby storage tank. The power company has faced a range of problems with leaks and with the plant's cooling system. TEPCO said it lost the ability to cool radioactive fuel rods in one of the plant's reactors for about 3 hours, the second cooling system failure at the plant in 3 weeks. A group of stunt drivers in Georgia have gone viral on YouTube for driving along the busy streets of the Georgian city of Tbilisi. Though the footage may seem extreme at first, its purpose is quite noble. The leader of the group is attempting to help people safely avoid dangerous situations on the road. Ra'ad Btush had more.
This is not a scene from a Hollywood movie, rather a number of perhaps Hollywood wannabe Georgian drivers. Extreme driving is expected to be practiced on highways or spacious squares. But for these stunned Georgian drivers, driving along the busy streets of Tbilisi is their favorite hobby. These guys call themselves the Need for Drive team, who seek more attention from Hollywood by uploading the videos on YouTube. This is the team leader driving his 1995 BMW M5 at top speeds through the city on streets crowded with public transportation, traffic and pedestrians.
We have more practical plans to find sponsors among the viewers of these videos to show we can advertise a company or a product of a company by making our videos.
The video, which featured the warning "Do not try this," garnered over 2 million views on YouTube within just a week after it was uploaded. The group leader says he was first drawn to racing and stunt driving at the age of 13 and been attempting to improve his skills and develop the hobby into a business ever since. Tivzadzes hopes the videos would help him and his team turn the hobby into a profession. Ra'ad Btush for the News at 10.
LeBron James scored 27 points to lead the Miami Heat to a 106-87 win over the Philadelphia 76ers at the American Airlines Center. Miami's other two stars, Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh, got the night off to rest for the upcoming playoffs as the Heat are assured of the top seed in the East. The win was the 60th win of the season for Miami, leaving them with just 6 games to go before they begin the defense of their NBA title in the playoffs.
James off the Anderson screen, Allen for 3. Got it! That one was on the money.
World number 1 Serena Williams breezed past her sister Venus 6-1, 6-2 in their first meeting since 2009 in the semifinals of the Family Circle Cup in Charleston, South Carolina. She needed only 22 minutes to take the first set against the 5th seed, delivering 8 winners to 0 unforced errors. Serena then took the second set to prevail for the 14th time against her sister. Serena will next face Jelena Jankovic in Sunday's final. Local hero Mohamed Ahansal of Morocco won the first stage of the 2013 Marathon des Sables, finishing the 37-kilometer stage in 2 hours, 50 minutes and 56 seconds. Hansal, who believes he is 40 years old but has no documentation to prove it, finished 4 minutes 29 seconds ahead of runner-up Antonio Solaris of Italy. Competitors race a total distance of around 250 kilometers over 7 days, including 1 rest day. And finally, for a quick look at the weather, fair and partly cloudy tonight with southwesterly moderate winds. A slight drop in temperature is expected tomorrow. Winds will be northwesterly brisk, creating dusty conditions in most regions, with a chance for light showers in the north. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect dusty conditions tomorrow, with southerly moderate winds and slightly high seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To end the news, here's a reminder of our top stories. His Majesty the King and the New Zealand Governor-General hold talks in Amman on bolstering bilateral cooperation and discuss developments in the region, namely Mideast peace efforts and the Syrian crisis. The U.S. Secretary of State, on a fresh round of diplomacy in the region, says world powers would pursue talks with Iran to resolve the nuclear dispute, but stressed the process could not go on forever. And China warns of trouble on its doorstep, and a U.S. official criticizes Beijing for failing to use its influence to stop North Korea's warlike rhetoric against the United States and South Korea. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Nancy Khair. Thank you for watching and have a good night.